بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد, continuing our series revealing our sisters, the lives and biographies of the righteous and great figures of female figures in Al-Islam. Today, inshallah, we'll look at the life and the teachings and benefits that we can derive from none other than Al-Tahira radiyallahu ta'ala anha, the one who was named Al-Tahira, which is Khadijah. May Allah be pleased with her, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And she was given the nickname, as mentioned by some of the ulama, like Ibn Asak and others. She was given the nickname Al-Tahira, the pure one. The same way that we know that Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha was given the nickname As-Siddiqa, or is referred to as the female truthful one, like her father As-Siddiq, the male truthful one from the men. Now, Khadijah radiyallahu ta'ala anha, her status in Islam is well known as being from the mother of the believers, a great illustrious companion, the Messenger ﷺ, and his beloved wife, and also one of the best in Islam in terms of the women. As we mentioned in the week before, the Rasul ﷺ, he mentioned when it comes to the status of the women of the past, he mentioned that the best of the women in her time was Maryam, means from Bani Israel. And the best of the men, best of the women of her time is Khadijah radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And we'll talk more about her virtue later. But we begin first by finding more about her. Who was she? What did she do? How can the women benefit from her great example? And so here I'll be reading primarily from the work of Sheikh Faisal al-Hashidi, may Allah preserve him, where he wrote a biography, a short biography of Khadijah radiyallahu ta'ala anha, referred to as Al-Tahira. The book is referred to as the pure one. And so he begins mentioning first her name and her lineage. And so she's al-Mu'mineen, the mother of the believers. And this is important. She's from the wives of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who are referred to as the mother of the believers. Khadijah Bint Khuwaylid bin Asad bin Abdul bin Qusay bin Kilab ibn Murra ibn Ka'ab ibn Lu'ay ibn Ghalib ibn Fihr ibn Malik ibn Nadar ibn Kinana Qurashi al-Asadi. And I read the entire lineage because there's a benefit we're going to take from that. But in short, her name is Khadijah Bint Khuwaylid. And her name, the ulama, they mention up until the full, because of the benefit, which is that her lineage, if you can recognize, it goes through Ibn Abdul Uzza, Ibn Qusay, Ibn Kilab, Ibn Murrah, etc. And this is the closest lineage to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hafid ibn Hajar, he mentions in Fath al-Bari, volume 7, page 167, that of all of the wives of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, هي من أقرب نسائه في النسب. She is the closest of his wives to him in lineage. And for therefore, her lineage ties with the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam lineage from Qusay downwards or upwards. So it's a benefit that not only is she his wife, his first wife, she's also the closest in lineage to him, alayhi salatu wassalam. Now, when it comes to her mother and father, the ulama, we say here first, her father, as we mentioned, is Khuwaylid ibn Asad. And he's one of those who was a leader of Quraysh in the past, one who had status amongst them, as Ibn Kathir mentions in Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya. As for her mother, her mother's name was Fatima bint Zaidah al-Amiriyah. Fatima bint Zaidah al-Amiriyah. And this was mentioned by Ibn Hisham in his seerah. So, Khadijah, she grew up and she lived in a household that was wealthy. And we know that her father was one who was wealthy, just like she was in her life later on. And so she comes from a well-off family, one that was wealthy. And this is evidenced by a few narrations, which we'll mention later. But what we take from this is that she grew up as like this, and this obviously impacted her status amongst the people of Quraysh. So she, coming from this wealthier household, she also had then a position of wealth, a position of status amongst the women of Quraysh and the people of Quraysh. And the ulama, they mention in Jahiliyyah, she was given the name Al-Tahira. As we know, a few names were given to her, nicknames, so we'll mention them. One of them, Ibn Asakir, he mentions in his Tariq al-Dimashq. Tariq al-Dimashq is the large voluminous work called the Biography of Damascus. And it's one of the largest works in Islam, and also when it comes to historical text. So he mentions on page 109 and 159 that she was nicknamed the Pure One, At-Tahira. Also, she was nicknamed the Unblemished. She was nicknamed the Unblemished. It means referring to her beauty and her appearance. And this was mentioned by some of the scholars like Imam Ibn Hajar and Fath al-Bari, Imam Dhahab bin Sir, and also Ibn Hisham and others. Again, these were all narrated, even though it's not necessarily hadith. It's just what comes in the books of biography. So, Khadijah, growing up in this wealthier household, she then naturally became involved in this wealth, and she became a businesswoman. And we know that she was a businesswoman because we know that that's how she was able to meet Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam in terms of her marriage to him. And so before we get to the story about how she married him alayhi salatu wasalam, we do know that she was a businesswoman. And this will obviously naturally tie in with the fact that her father was wealthy, but also because if you refer back to the hadith in Tirmidhi and others, the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam was hired by Khadijah to do some business on her behalf. And so from there we take that she was a businesswoman, and that she hired him and another man to do business. And this is important to take a look at her background prior to marrying the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also prior to I will correct myself there. There's two narrations about Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam's business dealings in Syria, and so one of them has to do when he first went there as a young man with his uncle Abu Talib, and there he met Bahira, the monk, and who saw the signs of prophethood, and later on when Khadijah sent him. And so the fact that Khadijah, she sent him there, she sent him to do business on her behalf. And this is mentioned by the ulama in their books. And so from here we learn that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was first notified about Khadijah, she was a woman of high status, of wealth, and she made a deal with him to do business on her behalf for a share of the profit. And this is something which indicates her status and also her wealth. And there's a few hadith on this, as mentioned in the book, the biography of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in light of the original sources and analytical study. And if you go to this book, which is in English and published by Dar al-Salam, 2 volumes, it brings all the various narrations about her hiring the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of those hadith is a hadith reported by Tabarani and also Al-Bazzar, and some of the scholars they graded Hassan, this is the exact report, which mentions full details about her hiring him. So as a businesswoman, Khadijah, she had wealth. But prior to marrying the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she was already married. So she was previously married, and she had children from those prior marriages. And so the scholars, they mention, they have a slight difference of opinion how many times Khadijah was married. So they mention she was first married to Atiq ibn A'id. Atiq ibn A'id bin Abdullah al-Makhzumi. And from him she had a son. She bore him, a female. A daughter named Hind. So first she was married to a man named Atiq ibn A'id bin Abdullah al-Makhzumi. And she bore him a child, a female named Hind. And then the scholars mention, after him she was married to Abu Hala ibn Nabbash al-Tamimi. Abu Hala al-Tamimi. And she bore him a boy, and some mention also a boy and a girl. And our scholars also differed, like Ibn Sa'ad in his Tabaqat, whether or not she was just married to one man, Abu Hala, rather than Atiq. But nonetheless, many of them mention that she was married twice. And so she had children, Hind, female, and later on another daughter named Hind, and Hala. Again, the scholars, they differed, but we do know that she had prior marriages. Now, Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he got to first was hired by Khadijah radiallahu ta'ala anha, he was much younger than she was. And we mentioned this before in our seerah lessons that we covered in the 100 lines of poetry of Ibn Abdul Aziz al-Hanafi rahimahullah, that the scholars usually of seerah, they mention that Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam was 25 years old when he married her. Again, when he did the business for her and they later on married, he was 25 years old as his first marriage. And she was about 40 years old. And we mentioned in those lessons that there is no authentic proof for any of that. The scholars, they mentioned this, however, there is no authentic proof for it. So just mentioned by Jumhur, the majority. So in reality, we can say that while the numbers differ, there is numbers. Some they mention that he sallallahu alayhi wasallam was 25 and she was 28, and some say she was 40, and some say she was 30, etc. What we do know is that she was older than him, by the very proof that she had previous marriages and children, whereas Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wasn't married to anyone before her, and she was the first one he married. So that much we can prove that she was older than him, and we know this, and the ulama, they all agree that she was older. Now, how does she marry Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam? And the scholars, they mention this, and they mention this based on this report, or reports when she hired him alayhi salatu wasalam to do business on her behalf. And now we're going to mention this story, and it's very important to pay attention to it because it helps us to understand a few things. First, we get to understand who she was. And secondly, who he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, as we're already aware, was Al-Amin, the trustworthy one. And this trustworthiness is exemplified in his character, alayhi salatu wasalam, before he was sent as a prophet and after. So when we look at the story, we mentioned that Ibn Hisham mentions this in his seerah, and there's some narrations in Bazar and Tabarani and others, that Khadijah radiallahu ta'ala anha, she hired the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam and another man. Now there's another report that says that she was hired, that he sallallahu alayhi wasallam was hired, another man was hired by Khadijah's sister. So there's different reports. Some mention the sister and some say it was her herself. But what we do know, the story was that Khadijah, as a wealthy businesswoman, she sent Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Sham, Greater Syria, to do business on her behalf, for an exchange of the Prophet, means of what she will gain. And she sent a slave named Maysara, her male slave, to see what he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do. And so Maysara, when he went with Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he saw various signs of prophethood and miracles and blessings, to which he reported to Khadijah. Also, there's a narration that mentioned that they passed by a town near Busra and Sham, and they found a monk thereby named Nastura, and no one but a prophet. The man said, no one but a prophet alighting under the shade of the tree. He has a red streak in his eyes. When Maysara said yes, he added that he doesn't go, and he said he is a prophet and the last of them. Means this man, Nastura, recognized signs of prophethood from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to which he told Maysara, and Maysara then went and told later on Khadijah about it. Again, some of these narrations we mentioned, they are mentioned in the books of Sirah, like this one, Ibn Ishaq narrated, bidun sanad, without a chain of transmission. So even though we cannot say these are authentic reports, these are what's been narrated. He gave us a general idea. And so the scholars then, they continue to mention more details. And we have to note, just as a benefit, that some of these narrations, some of the scholars objected to it. For example, this story I just mentioned now of Nastura, Imam al-Zahabi in Sirah al-Nubala, he mentions the report and he says he rejected it because he said Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the hadith at Tirmidhi, the one that's mentioned in Tirmidhi, when he went to do business on behalf alongside his uncle Abu Talib, he was told by Bahira not to come back. And so how was it possible that he went back again afterwards? That's one. Another argument that was mentioned is that there's other reports that mention these stories, and they're all weak. They have weakness in them. So we do mention that this as by way of academic honesty, that there are some weaknesses in these narrations, but they're mentioned. The story is true that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam married or met Khadijah through this dealing. This much we do know. Either she sent him, or he was sent by her sister. Because, again, we said the family was wealthy and Khadijah was a businesswoman. So, with this, she heard the reports about his trustworthiness, about his honesty. Some of the reports even mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ engaged in a different dispute or argument with the other man who was dispatched. And the other man asked Rasul ﷺ to swear by Allah and Uzza, to which Rasul ﷺ said, I never swore by them and I've been ordered to abandon them. Means he's pure upon Tawheed and the Sunnah and Islam. Means the idea of pure monotheism. Rasul ﷺ rejected that. And so she saw all of these things in him when she heard reports from Maysara who he was. Again, qualities that make him, alayhi salatu wasalam, a perfect spouse. Now, there also has been reported that when he returned also with the prophets, and it was much more than she had earned from anyone else. Again, aside Rasul's trustworthiness and his barakah, the blessings that he had. So from here, she married him and decided to marry him. Now a question arises, why did Khadijah send Rasul or Khadijah's sister, why did they send Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam to do the travel, to do the trading for her? Why didn't she do it herself? And I want to mention this benefit because it's important that as Muslims, when we look at our pious predecessors, the male and female companions, that we have the correct understanding of who they are. And we understand them for who they are. Sometimes you have people in our time who take the example of Khadijah radiyallahu ta'ala anha, and they try to overemphasize the fact that she was a businesswoman, especially in light of today's social milieu. And they try to highlight how Khadijah was a wealthy, independent, businesswoman, and she was doing these amazing things, transcending, trailblazing, breaking gender, stereotypes, whatever else you may hear. Forgetting that Khadijah, her life is more than her business, and she has different aspects of her life, all of which are virtue. But when it comes to the issue of business, yes, she was a successful businesswoman. There is no doubt in that. But with that, it didn't intend that she was doing business by traveling herself, because the Arab in general didn't do this. The women didn't travel freely without their maharim. And also, this is a benefit we take, that the scholars, they mentioned that the Arab generally, the women didn't used to travel except usually for Hajj. And they used to travel with their maharim before and after Islam, before the advent of Islam and after. And so this, for these reasons, this social norm meant that Khadijah, when she wanted to do business as a businesswoman, she contracted Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and other men to do business on her behalf, which again is business, and this is good. And so we can see there's no contradiction between being a businesswoman and being a Muslimah according to the Sharia. It's important that we don't get carried away with these kind of ideals which are set outside of our tradition. We accept everything as it is and we benefit from it, but there's no contradiction in being that. For those reasons, Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentions in his Sharh al-Umdah that the men used to travel with their women when they went for Hajj. وَهُوَ أَغْلَبُ أَسْفَارُ النِّسَاءِ, and used to be the majority of the travels of the women. For a woman did not used to travel, i.e., generally, did not used to travel to go for combat, means in military affairs, وَلَا تِجَارَ غَالِبًا, nor for business in general, وَإِنَّمَا تُسَافِرْ فِي الْحَجِّ. Now they used to travel mainly for Hajj. And this is mentioned in volume 2, page 175 of his book, Sharh al-Umdah of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. Sharh Umdah fi fiqh. So it's a benefit to take, understand that this was a social environment. And of course, if there's no contradiction, a woman doing business nowadays and traveling with her mahram, as Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught us, alayhi salatu wasalam, about the rules of Islam when it comes to women and travel. So this helps to understand in general why she sent someone. But nonetheless, being convinced with Rasulullah's high qualities and virtues, she decided to marry him. And of course, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was a perfect, a man to marry. And it comes in narration in Bazzar and Tabarani that some scholars graded as Hassan. So for example, the author, Dr. Mahdi Rizqullah Ahmed, in his biography, The Prophet of Islam, in light of the original sources and analytical study, he graded this narration Hassan. Whereas others, they mention, like Al-Haythami and others, that it is authentic. So some scholars authenticated. Now what happened was that Khadijah's sister, after she hired Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and other men to do business on their behalf, and when they came back with, the large sum of money, they gave it to Khadijah, and the other man kept demanding for his share of the wealth. And so when the Prophet ﷺ was reminded that he should go and ask for his due, he replied that he was shy of asking. So Khadijah's sister told Khadijah this, and she was pleased by this and decided to marry him. And so she asked him to seek her father's consent. Okay, so she asked Rasul ﷺ, go ask my father for my hand. Now the scholars differ, and we're going to say it now. Who married Khadijah off? Was it her father or was it her uncle? So some scholars said it was her uncle because her father died in the battle of Fijar. And this was before. So this means that he died before, so he wasn't present. It was the uncle. However, the stronger narrations with stronger roots come to the point that it was her father. It was her father. So, here, when she told Rasulullah to go ask her father for her hand, and it's an important benefit because it helps us to understand the situation. Rasulullah wasn't wealthy, as we know. He came from a poorer background, and we do know that Rasulullah, understanding her status, he was worried. So it comes in the narration that he said, alayhi salatu Abuki rajulun kathirul mali wa huwa la yaf'alu. He told her, your father has a lot of money. He's a rich man, and I'm afraid he won't agree to marry me. So she said, again, according to this narration, Tabarani Bazzar, and some scholars graded Hassan. Okay, we're going to mention this. When he said that, because again, he's poor and she's wealthy, and this is something which we relate to today nowadays. How can you seek the hand of a wealthier woman? Some men wonder, how can I marry her? She's wealthy, I'm poor, I can't handle, or I won't be accepted because of my social and economic status. So she said, go and speak to him, and go to him when he's in a state where he's drunk, means it's time in Jahiliyyah, and inshallah he will accept. And so this is what is narrated. In any case, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam married her, and she married him because of his great qualities, alayhi salatu wasalam. So she was a smart woman, It shows her purity and her wisdom. She saw in him great signs. And of course, later on we know how great of a wife she was, and how great of a husband he was, alayhi salatu wasalam. As we said, some of the ulama say it was Amr bin Asad who married him off. And they use as proof the fact that her father passed away, as I mentioned that. And they also bring some, there is some narrations also suggest, wallahu a'lam, if it's the same Amr. In Adab Mufrad it's mentioned in a narration that Amr gave the wedding feast for Rasulullah when he got married. So that's another evidence to show that perhaps it could have been the uncle if this is the same Amr, wallahu a'lam. But nonetheless, we're mentioning all of this to get us some context as to how they got married. Coming back to her life, when she married Rasulullah, she has many virtues, and many of those virtues is that she gave birth exclusively to all the children of the Messenger ﷺ except for Ibrahim. The ulama mentioned that one of the great virtues of Khadijah, she gave birth to all of his children ﷺ except for Ibrahim, who was given birth to by Maria, Ibrahim, Maria, radiallahu ta'ala anha. So the children she gave birth to, Al-Qasim first, who was the eldest son, hence the nickname Rasulullah had, Abu Al-Qasim, but he died young. We know all the male children passed away, only the daughters they survived to older age. The next was Zainab, right? Then Ruqayyah, then Kulthum, and then Fatima. And there's also another son named Abdullah. Some ulama say that he was referred to as a Tayyib and Tahir, and some they said otherwise, that it was actually a child named Tayyib Tahir. But we covered those in our Sirah lessons, what exactly was intended by that, despite the differences. So all the children she gave birth to, except for Ibrahim. Also, we know from Khadijah's standing, Rasulullah had much respect for her, and much love for her, and much concern for her. And this can be quantified by her virtues and also her great work. So when she became his wife, ﷺ, she was his greatest supporter. And she was his greatest financer for da'wah, the philanthropist, giving the money to support the da'wah, standing by his side in the initial time when he received revelation. If you go back to the narration in Sahih al-Bukhari, when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam first became prophet, we see that she's the one who gave him comfort when he was doubting himself. So why was Rasulullah doubting himself? He was afraid that he spoke with not an angel but a devil or jinn, as this was something which was mentioned in some narrations in Tabarani, his Mu'jam, that Rasulullah was afraid that he was hallucinating, he spoke to a jinn or a devil. So he was afraid that he didn't know if he was to be bewitched or to be, to be possessed. And so Khadijah, when he came to her, Khadijah told him, after he asked to be covered up, this again Hadith Bukhari, in Hadith number 3 in his Sahih, after he had these doubts, means worries, more worries, he said, لَقَدْ خَشِيتُ عَلَى نَفْسِي, I'm afraid for myself. Means this is what he's afraid of, that he's been possessed or he doesn't know who he has spoken to. So she said to him immediately, and this is so important, to show her high status as a confidant, as a supporter, as a believer. She said, كَلَّا وَاللَّهِ مَا يُخْزِيكَ اللَّهُ أَبَدًا. By Allah, never will Allah disgrace you. SubhanAllah. And then she mentioned enumerating his various good deeds. إِنَّكَ لَتَصِلُ الرَّحِمْ وَتَحْمِلُ الْكَلَّ وَتَكْسِبُ الْمَعْدُومِ وَتَقْرِيُ الضَّيْفِ وَتُعِينُ عَنْ نَوَائِبِ الْحَقِّ. SubhanAllah. She said, you keep good relations with your kith and kin. You help the poor and the destitute. You serve your guests generously and assist those deserving after afflicted with calamity and those who are in need. So Khadijah's great status is right there alone, that she was there as the first to believe in him ﷺ from the women. And the scholars differed. Was she the first of Sahaba, from the Sahaba? Was she the first, or is it Abu Bakr? Is it khilaf? Some they say that she's the first from the women, bila shak, and Abu Bakr is first from the men, and some precede her over Abu Bakr, and some precede Abu Bakr over her. Again, to summarize, no doubt she was from those earlier. SubhanAllah. And that comes from great confidence in her husband, but also in her own faith and her intelligence, because she knew Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be forsaken. Anyone who does these type of good deeds, Allah will aid. And she's the one who directed him alayhi salatu salam to Waraqah bin Nawfal, who then informed him about Jibreel alayhi salam, who came to him. So the ulama mentions the fada'il. Shaykh Faisal Hashidi mentions some of the fada'il of Khadijah radiyallahu ta'ala anha, as we mentioned them now. Some of her fada'il, he says, number one, Jibreel came to Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he gave salam to Khadijah on behalf of himself. He told Rasul to send the salam. So this is a powerful benefit. حديث أبو هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال أتى جبريل عليه السلام النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال يا رسول الله هذه خديجة قد أتت معها إناء فيه إدام. That one day Jibreel came to Rasul and said, this is Khadijah is coming, Ya Rasulullah, carrying a vessel with some condiment or food or drink. So when she comes, فَقْرَأْ عَلَيْهَا السَّلَامِ مِنْ رَبِّهَا وَمِنِّي. We give her the salam from her Lord and from me. Subhanallah. And so this is also reported in the hadith of Anas. And then Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he gave her the salam, she said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ السَّلَامُ وَعَلَى جِبْرِيلُ السَّلَامُ وَعَلَيْكَ السَّلَامُ وَرَحْمَةُ اللَّهِ وَبَرَكَاتُهُ. Verily Allah is as-salam, and upon you, O Jibreel, be salam, means peace, and upon you also be peace and blessings, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is a beautiful hadith showing her virtue. And it comes in Zad Ma'ad Ibn Qayyim. Ibn Qayyim commented on the hadith saying, وَهِيَ فَضِيلَةٌ لَا تُعْرَفُ لِإِمْرَأَةٍ سِوَاهَا. This is a benefit. This is a virtue we don't know any other woman got besides her. Subhanallah. Zad al-Ma'ad Ibn Qayyim, volume 1, page 105. Second virtue, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was commanded to give her the glad tidings of a house in paradise in which there is no noise, disturbance, or worry. Hadith in Bukhari, that Ibn Abi Awfa, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him, said, Bashar al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam Khadijah, and he said that she will have a baytin min qasabin wala sakhaba fihi wala nasab. That she has been given the glad tidings of a palace made of qasab. A palace made of qasab in paradise in which there will be no noise or fatigue therein. And so here, the ulama, they discuss what's intended by this hadith. What is this virtue? So qasab, Imam Nawawi says in Sharh Muslim, قال الجمهور العلماء قصب اللؤلؤ المجوف كالقصر المنيف. It's like qasab intended here is hollow pearl. It's a hollow pearl, so a palace made of hollow pearl. And this is according to the majority of ulama, and of course, different opinions also given, but the majority mentioned that is a pearl. Subhanallah, a pearl palace, which there is no noise and there's no fatigue. It's an interesting point. Why is she giving this? What's intended? Okay, and I want to mention this beautiful benefit. And the reason why the ulama mention this is that as Suhayli fi Rawd al-Unaf, he said, the reason why she's given this without any fatigue and no difficulty and no noise is in exchange, in compensation for the things that she went through and the difficulties in supporting Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the deen of Islam. Hafid ibn Hajar brings in Fath al-Bari a beautiful point. And this, I want to read this point here as well, connected to this. He says also, Suhaili said that there's a benefit. He says there's a benefit here, معنى لطيف, a very subtle benefit, which is that the reason why she's given this is that she was the female head of the household of the Prophet ﷺ in a time when nobody was Muslim except for the household. So in exchange for that, means there was no one on the face of earth, the household which is Muslim, at the time that she and Rasulullah were Muslim, and her children, because later on we know, Ali also accepted Islam, etc. That whole household was Muslim, and so due to this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given her a house or palace in paradise, an extra one, meaning beyond what she already has from her good deeds, beyond that, as a compensation for the house that she was running, or partly running in the dunya. Subhanallah. And this is a beautiful, beautiful reminder that when someone does something and strives for the sake of Allah, Allah will compensate. Allah will reward. هَلْ جَزَاءُ الْإِحْسَانِ إِلَّا الْإِحْسَانِ. Allah says, isn't the reward for good except for good? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shakirun alim. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ شَاكِرٌ عَلِيمًا. Allah is all appreciative of His believer, of His servants when they do good. And He's all knowing of them and what they're doing. So this is a great benefit. Fath al-Bari, volume 7, page 169, in terms of that benefit. Also, Rasulullah, he never married any other woman when she was alive, besides her. Means when she was alive, he had no other co-wives. Again, showing how deeply attached Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was to her, and how much he loved her, honored her. That's another virtue she has. Others, they mentioned, again, a benefit, that the reason why she has that house made of pearl is because the status, right? It indicates jihit al-istiwa. It shows her high ascending status. The same way that pearl has a great status over other types of rubies and gem and jewelry, likewise Khadijah has. And that's why some of the scholars, they went so far as to debate her status, who is better of the women. Some, they mention that Khadijah, as it comes in narration, is the best of the women. And others, they mention that she's amongst the best of the women, as you mentioned before, the four. And some have other opinions, but no doubt her status is very high. Radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, as he said, حسبك من نساء العالمين مريم بنت عمران وخديجة بنت خويلد وفاطمة بنت محمد وآسية امرأة فرعون. Sufficient for you as the best of women of all time, of all mankind, Maryam, the daughter of Imran, Khadijah, daughter of Khuwaylid, Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, and Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun. Also, the other hadith, Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the Rasul said, خير نسائها مريم وخير نسائها خديجة. The best of the women of Israel is Maryam, and the best of the women from the Arab, from our Ummah is Khadijah radiallahu ta'ala anha. And that's why Nawawi says, means في عصرها, in her time. And so therefore she's the best. Also, right, many other hadith showing her virtue. And from those, that Khadijah, one of the things that we can take from her life and the benefits, because she has many virtues like this, means all these virtues showing how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored her, and that she was there for Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and she supported him in times of difficulty. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam showed her virtue as well through the fact that he would often remember her after she passed away, radiyallahu anha. And he would, alayhi salatu wasalam, remember her. And so the ulama, they mentioned that Khadijah, she died when she was about 65 years old. And they mentioned that she passed, as we know, before the Isra al-Mi'raj. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would often remember her. And every time he remembered her, he would become emotional. And that led to Aisha radiallahu anha having some jealousy towards her. And once Aisha, in that state of jealousy, which is a ghayra that women have for their husbands, she mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, he doesn't have to worry about Khadijah anymore, for Allah given her, means she gave Aisha in exchange, means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has replaced Khadijah with someone better. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned something to show Khadijah's status, and he became very upset. And became so upset at one point that Aisha was worried that some revelation would come down against her because of that, because she said something which she shouldn't have said. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave then, he mentioned how great of a status that she had. And this is important because it shows you again that this role Khadijah had in his life is not something small, right? We have to always remember, we say today in our society, behind every great man is a great woman. And this is so true. When we look here in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is a great, great woman. So it comes in the hadith that when Aisha said this, and Rasulullah became upset. And this hadith, there's one hadith, one I mentioned earlier, the hadith where Aisha said that Rasulullah became so upset that she said, I saw his face change, and I was afraid that nuzul wahi, some kind of revelation will come down to him in relation to what I did. And so she was worried until either if there's mercy going to come her way or punishment. Of course, is nothing happened. But Rasulullah was very upset because again, how much he valued her for what she did. And this hadith Muslim Ahmed Sahih. And so he mentions Rasulullah said one day, when Aisha said something similar, he says, وَقَدْ آمَنَتْ بِي إِذْ كَفَرَ بِي النَّاسُ. That Khadijah believed in me when all the people disbelieved in me. وَصَدَّقَتْنِي إِذْ كَذَّبَنِي النَّاسُ. That she also believed in me. She affirmed and when I came with, when everyone else belied me. وَوَاسَتْنِي بِمَالِهَا إِذْ حَرَمَنِي النَّاسُ. And she gave me from her wealth. And this is an important benefit that we know Khadijah before Islam, she was a businesswoman, successful. But what did she do with all her wealth? She financed the da'wah of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. SubhanAllah, she gave her wealth. She said, but no one else gave me. وَرَزَقَنِي اللَّهُ وَلَدَهَا إِذْ حَرَمَنِي أَوْلَادِ النِّسَاءِ. And Allah provided for me children through her, and He didn't provide for me children from any of my other wives. So this is a great status that she has, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, and we take a great benefit from her life. Amongst those benefits, which firstly is that the strength and power of a great woman, a great wife, a great companion, a great supporter, it's absolutely necessary in the life of a man. Especially Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, as great as he was as a prophet, his wife Khadijah, she's also the best of his ummah. So a great reminder to look at how powerful it is to have a strong woman, powerful, strong in faith, strong in iman, intelligence. Having someone like this in part of your life, or a husband for a man, is very powerful, a great blessing, as we know. From the greatest blessings in the dunya for a man is maratu salihah, a righteous wife. And the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam honored her like this, such that after he passed away, he used to send some of the slaughtered meat, and he used to say, "Arsilu biha ila asdiqa al-Khadijah." Give it to the friends of Khadijah, as a way to honor her, subhanallah, because of the much love he has for her, and again, what she has done. Another benefit we also see is that how important it is also to see how it's just in Islam, both men and female, male and females, they're both responsible and also can engage in the da'wah. And engaging in da'wah doesn't always mean preaching. As we know, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he was the prophet of our ummah. And so Khadijah is a believer. She believed in him, and she supported him, and she aided him both in word, support, and money. And so here we see that da'wah people can get involved in the da'wah. They can support the da'wah through their moral support, through their good words, and of course through her money. And Khadijah, subhanAllah, she gave. Another benefit we take from her life is the idea of being a businesswoman. A woman is permissible in Islam for a woman to be a businesswoman. Again, within the hudud al-shara', within the legislation, within the boundaries of the legislation. And so Faisal Hashti has another book in which talks about tijara, business, and he brings this point. And there's a fatwa from the permanent committee in which they were asked, permanent committee Lajnatu Da'ima, they were asked a question about a woman doing business in the marketplace and buying and selling. And they said that يجوز لها, it's permissible for a woman أن تذهب إلى السوق لتبيع وتشتري, to buy and sell goods. If she has a need, means to make money, to support herself or the family, it means everyone's situation is different. And provided she's covering fully, means her body, she's wearing the proper hijab, and doesn't necessitate anything haram, like the free mixing, and etc. And so here we see in Islam that the concept of a woman being a businesswoman or being a woman who has an occupation or a skill, there is no contradiction between that and Islam, provided it's done in an Islamic manner. And sometimes we find that this is where the problems come. That we may tell ourselves that something which is other than the reality. We know other sahabiyat also who did business, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was aware of them and didn't prohibit them. But the key is to always be mindful of the rules and legislation of Islam. And of course, right, situations differ from family to family. But at the same time, as Khadijah was once a businesswoman, she was also a mother. It's important we combine and look at all of her identity. She was also a mother. And she was a believer. And she was a worshipper. And all of these things. So we cannot just, as some people do, zone in and hone into that idea as a businesswoman and try to take this example or this part of her life and exclusively and try to, plaster this as the example only. This is part of Islamic tradition as well as other parts of Khadijah's life. So we have to respectfully represent all of who she was, radiallahu ta'ala anha. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam also, he was so pleased with her. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was pleased with her for her belief in her deen. And so we see a strong role model, a strong personality for the women to look up to. And not just to highlight those aspects, we take it as it is. And so from there we take many things that the women, we need to pay attention to looking at our sahabiyat and benefiting from them for who they were and trying to emulate ourselves. Starting first with the beliefs and the practice of faith and then moving towards other elements. And we shouldn't think that Islam limits the women from that which is khayr and that which is permissible. Rather, Islam permits certain things, it prohibits other things based on ilm, knowledge and hikmah. And so there are many other benefits from Khadijah's life, but we will suffice with this much. And of course, we also see that all these great women we're covering so far, these women, really they show us that Islam has come to elevate the women, because we have so many great female scholars and worshippers and role models. And we need to revive these legacies in the time we're living in today. We need to revive them, especially in a time where we are being questioned. Muslim Ummah is being questioned in terms of their relationship with women. What's the role of women and women's rights? And also we're getting different images presented to us in the media, and sadly even in the Muslim Ummah, as to what the ideal Muslim woman should look like. And sometimes we find that this strays far away. Some of these examples may stray far away from the actual teachings and actual examples of the people who passed, well, Allah granted in paradise. So the best way to resurrect the great examples is by returning back to the biographies of those who passed, those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted success, and to emulate them as they were, and to ask Allah for tawfiq. Inshallah, we'll end with this much. If anyone has any questions or something they wish to add and mention, inshallah we'll take them. One of the questions says, is it permissible for women to hire men to work for them? This is a question obviously to be investigated more. But what we do see from Khadijah that she did hire Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and another man to do business. But this was before Islam, not after. So, while that being said, this is something that should be investigated, inshallah, and researched more. And that's the best way to answer it. But we do take from the origin that we mentioned earlier that she was a businesswoman, and that much we can confirm as we have other proofs for. But as for this particular point, as she did prior to Islam, then inshallah we will research into it more. If anyone else has any questions? Anyone else have any questions? طيب, inshallah. I believe there's one more question coming here. Also, as a benefit, just to finish, I believe I didn't mention that. So we mentioned Khadijah, she passed away. Some ulama say at 65, and others they give different ages. And they mention that when she passed away, she was buried, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, in Mecca, in a place called Hajun. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's mentioned by Hafn Hajj and Isab and others that he used to come, he visited her grave. And that time when she passed away, there was no Salat al-Janazah, so there was no prayer. And so this is what happens. And so this is where she was buried. It's pretty much a mountain in Mecca. I mean, a mountainous region in Mecca where she was buried underneath there. Also, a benefit that when it comes to the year she passed away, Many of the ulama, they mentioned this year as Aam al-Huzn, but as we mentioned in our Sirah lesson before, that there is no proof for that. As Shaykh al-Albani mentioned, that there is no dalil to mention it as Aam al-Huzn. So Aam al-Huzn is something which was mentioned, like Ibn Ishaq and others, but there's no proof for it. No doubt Rasulullah was bothered severely in grieving over it, but we can't call it that, so just a side benefit that we stick to that which has been reported. Question says, can a woman give lectures in front of men and women? We mentioned this in some lessons before, and the correct view is that a woman should avoid that. As for specifics, then obviously this is something which needs to look into, but in general, the ulama, they mentioned this should be avoided, and there's proof for it. And some scholars, like Shaykh Ibn Baz, rahimahullah, permitted a woman to give a lecture if she's covered in hijab in front of men. Some of them permitted, but many of them did not. So while this was mentioned by some, others didn't. And again, because the conditions, the idea is that woman, al-maratu awra, comes the hadith ibn Mas'ud, a woman should be concealing herself, and the idea of the hijab is to conceal herself. So she should give talks in front of women, no problem. But in front of the men, it can be fitna, and we know the men are being commanded to lower the gaze and the likes. So this is something that should be avoided. As for someone who's working as a therapist, can they speak to men and women for help? These kind of specifics, obviously, they need to be taken a look at case by case, what exactly is being mentioned. And that's why these type of issues cannot be given just blanket ruling. Rather, someone should look at each case and to see what is the situation. Naam. Another question says, a virtue is that the Prophet ﷺ did not marry alongside Khadijah because he honored and loved her. But does that decrease from the honor of a woman who has co-wives? The answer is no. Alright, so Rasulullah ﷺ, because he chose to not marry anyone alongside with her, doesn't mean that if he married her, a wife is married with co-wives, that she's less honorable. For we know, when Rasulullah was asked who was the best of the women that he loved after Khadijah, it was Aisha, and Aisha was a co-wife, but it was the most beloved to him. And her status is also there. Rasulullah said that the virtue of Aisha over the other women is like the virtue of Farid over all of the food. Right? So there is no decrease in that. But it might show us that Rasulullah he married Khadijah and he honored her through this, also as indications for what she did for him. Right? She married him when he didn't have much and she was wealthy. She gave him the children, all of these things. When she was through him, she had children, all these things which she honored her. But it doesn't mean that the other co-wives were not honored because he had other wives. Rather, they were also honored. And so it's a different type of honoring and a different type of love. But each of it is love and each of it is respect. Right? So we see there's a benefit and a combination in that. Na'am. Any other questions? Otherwise, inshallah, we'll end with this much. And the point I want to highlight from all of these lessons that we're giving now is to highlight our female role models for the men and the women, to learn about them, but also to take from their lives that which can improve our lives. And so as a reminder that when we go through these lessons and we see these different benefits that we try to derive, from the works of the ulama, that we try our best to aspire to be like them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask Allah to give us tawfiq to emulate these great women, these great men, and our righteous predecessors. And we ask Allah to have mercy upon them and to elevate their status. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.